What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for the final conference where we've gone through all the Power 5 conferences here and given you the projected records, the projected standings based off of our projected record formula. If you missed the individual videos, if you want to know how exactly we got to the record that we got to for each team, there are videos posted for every single Power 5 team. You can go watch those and see the full schedule preview and again how we got to this record. So this is what the Big 12 would look like, and I want to emphasize that the projections are done based off of the overall record. I just kind of filled in the conference standings as for what made the most sense from those overall records. So it could change a little bit as far as the standings go, but really you want to focus on the overall record. So at the bottom you've got Iowa State and West Virginia, both at 5-7, 3-6 in the conference. I'll tell you what, I think Iowa State could be a surprise team. I do not think they're the second worst team in the Big 12. I think they're going to do better than 5-7 this year, but their schedule is brutal. I mean, it is a really tough schedule, so I could see how they could possibly go 5-7 and miss a bowl again this year. But again, I think this team's going to surprise some people this year, but that schedule could ultimately keep them down. West Virginia also has a tough schedule, and I think a bowl game could be a little bit tougher for West Virginia, actually. So BYU at 6-6 overall. They would come out to maybe 4-5 in the conference. So their first year in the Big 12, a losing record, but not by much. Again, at 4-5. And I tell you what, the schedules, because of the way the Big 12 did their schedules, there's a lot of discrepancy between some of the teams that had easier schedules and some of the teams that had tougher schedules. There is a big difference in these conference schedules, and they matter. They are going to matter for these standings. Maybe not for the two teams that wind up going to the Big 12 championship, but for the rest of the standings, you're going to see possibly a 2-game difference between teams that are really pretty much even, but just one has a tougher schedule. So BYU there at 6-6 overall, and you see a big tie here. All these teams 7-5. Oklahoma State, UCF, Kansas, and Houston all going 7-5 overall, 4-5 in the conference. Again, maybe if they could go a little different. Maybe they could go 3-6 in the conference. Maybe they could go 5-4 in the conference. It all really This is all based off of that overall record. This is just what made the most sense as far as what the conference record would be. So all these teams are kind of put into the same tier. BYU was in there as well, and some other teams that you're going to see on the next page, like Cincinnati was put into this tier, a couple other teams I think, but it's all based off of the schedule, and that's why these teams wound up at 7-5. Again, Oklahoma State, UCF, Kansas, and Houston, all 7-5 overall, 4-5 in the conference, and this is what I think we're going to get in the Big 12. It's going to be a very close race. I mean, when you've got 14 teams, you've got no divisions, you're going to have a bunch of teams probably jumbled up at 4-5 or 5-4. I mean, there's a lot of parity in this conference. There are no bad teams in this conference. The Big 12 probably has the best bottom tier of all the Power 5 when you talk about, I mean, if it's Iowa State and West Virginia, I'd take those teams over Rutgers and Indiana. I'd take them over Vanderbilt out of the SEC. I'd take them over Cal or Stanford out of the Pac-12. I take them over Virginia or some of those teams in the ACC. So they don't really have any terrible teams, and they also don't have any elite teams. They don't have any teams that are clear playoff contenders, top 5 teams in the preseason. And so there is a lot of parity in this conference, and it's wide open. I think it's very tough to predict. But again, when you do this formula, it's kind of a conservative approach, and you're going to get a lot of records right there at 4-5, 5-4. And you see some teams here. All these teams are also 7-5. Baylor, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati. They're all 7-5. So same overall records as those teams we just showed you, but 5-4 in the conference. That tells us that they have an easier conference schedule, or perhaps a tougher non-conference schedule just because of the way it lays out here. So Baylor, Texas Tech, Cincinnati. Baylor plays Utah. Texas Tech plays Oregon. Cincinnati got a really, really easy conference schedule. I mean, it is really easy. I'm not sure how that happened. I think Cincinnati's probably going to be worse than Iowa State. But because of their schedules, you can see Cincinnati projected to have a better record by 2 games. And so I'll go on record and say I believe Iowa State is going to be a better team than Cincinnati this year. But Cincinnati might have the better record just because of their schedule. And that's really what this is all about, is seeing what these teams are expected to do based off of how tough their schedule is. We've got Oklahoma and Kansas State, both at 8-4. Kansas State also has a pretty tough schedule. I think they were actually, when I did these projections, I had them in a tier above Oklahoma. So I had Kansas State, Texas, and TCU in that top tier. Now, I've evaluated these teams more, and I believe all 4 of those teams should actually be in the same tier. But when I did this, again, we started this back in January, I had Oklahoma a step behind Kansas State just because of how they finished last year with a losing record. But I do think Oklahoma is in that top tier. But I think, these top 6 teams, mark off Cincinnati. I don't think they're in this conversation. But I think these top 6 teams are the teams that have the best chance to get to the Big 12 championship. So we're talking about TCU and Texas, and then Oklahoma, Kansas State, Baylor, and Texas Tech. And yes, I think Baylor could enter into that conversation. This is a team that I think will be improved this year. So Texas also at 8-4, but 6-3 in the conference because they do play Alabama in the non-conference. That's really the difference here. Oklahoma has a much easier non-conference schedule. So again, that's what I was talking about with Texas. I actually projected them in a tier above Oklahoma. But the same overall record because they play Alabama. They have a tougher schedule. And then TCU at the top, 9-3 overall, an easier non-conference schedule than Texas. And then again, 6-3 in the conference. So our projection would have TCU versus Texas in the conference championship. But I'll tell you what, since I've evaluated these teams more, I'm not as high on TCU. And I'm higher on Texas. I'm higher on Oklahoma. I've been about in the same spot for Kansas State. But I think those 4 teams are the favorites, and I think Baylor and Texas Tech definitely are contenders as well. This Big 12 race is going to be really fun, and I think it's going to be a close one. So we'll see what happens. These, again, are our projections. Give us your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.